My son stood silent, while his wife insulted me at dinner. The table I set. I still remember the sound of the plates, how they clinked softly against one another as I laid them on the table. The same blue porcelain I'd saved for special occasions, the ones with little golden rims that had seen decades of birthdays, Christmases, and Sunday dinners. My hands trembled slightly that evening, though I told myself it was just age, not nerves. I wanted everything perfect. The roast was tender, the vegetables buttery and bright. My son Daniel was coming home with his wife Clara. They had been married 3 years, and this was their first dinner at my house since the wedding. I had seen them a few times, holidays mostly, but something in his tone lately, over the phone, told me there was distance, a gap I couldn't quite cross. Still, I told myself love could fill any silence. I placed Daniel's plate at the head of the table, where his father used to sit. It felt right somehow. I whispered, "Welcome home," even before they arrived, as if the house could rehearse the feeling. The arrival. Their car pulled up just after 6. I smoothed my apron and smiled through the window. When Daniel stepped out, my heart surged the way it used to when he was a boy, coming home from school with his backpack, sliding off one shoulder. He looked older now, tired maybe. There were faint lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Clara followed, tall and graceful, her heels clicking on the path. She carried a small box of chocolates. "From both of us," she said, offering it with a practiced smile. "Thank you, dear," I said, taking them gently. "You didn't have to—" "I know," she interrupted, still smiling, "but it's polite." Her tone was smooth but sharp around the edges. I brushed it off. Maybe she was nervous too. Families are complicated things. When we sat down, Daniel glanced at the photos on the wall, his childhood pictures, the ones I could never take down. I wondered if he felt embarrassed by how tightly I still clung to the past. Dinner began quietly, the way a storm begins before it breaks. The words that shattered the roast. The moment came midway through the meal, right when I thought we had settled into something warm and familiar. Clara set down her fork and smiled faintly. "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about something, Margaret." Her tone made my stomach tighten. "People don't use your first name like that unless they mean to lecture you." "Oh?" I said softly. "What is it, dear?" She glanced at Daniel, who shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "It's just the way you sometimes interfere with how we handle things. You called last week to remind Daniel about his doctor's appointment and, well, it's not really appropriate anymore. He's not a child." The room went still. Even the clock seemed to pause. I stared at my son, my boy who once clung to my hand crossing the street, who cried when I left him at kindergarten. He sat there, eyes on his plate, saying nothing. "I was just worried," I whispered. "He's always been forgetful, that's all." Clara gave a small laugh. "You mean because you always handled things for him? He's trying to grow, Margaret. Maybe you could step back a little." Step back. 2 words, sharp and clean as a knife. I felt my throat tighten, my heart pulsing in my ears. I wanted to defend myself, to say that mothers don't stop being mothers just because their children marry. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came. Daniel still wouldn't look at me. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. Not here, not in front of her. The silence of my son. After dinner, I stood by the sink washing dishes while Daniel and Clara talked quietly in the living room. Their laughter drifted through the doorway like music from another life. He had laughed like that once with me, when we baked cookies, when we sang Christmas carols off key. Those moments had been small miracles. Now they felt like ghosts that refused to leave. When he finally came into the kitchen, I pretended to be busy drying a plate. "Did you have enough to eat?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "Yeah," he said, scratching his neck. "Dinner was great, Mom. You always cook too much." I smiled faintly. "You used to say that meant I loved you." He didn't reply, he just gave a small, uneasy smile. The kind people use when they don't want to talk anymore. I wanted to ask him why he said nothing when Clara spoke to me that way. Why he sat there like a guest in someone else's story. But I didn't. Because I already knew the answer. He wanted peace, even if it meant silence. The night after. After they left, I sat at the table long after the dishes were done. The roast sat cold on the counter, untouched leftovers staring back like a metaphor for everything that had gone unsaid. I replayed the moment in my mind, her words, his silence. I had imagined this dinner would bridge the distance between us. Instead, it built another wall. The house felt cavernous that night. Every clock tick sounded like a reproach. Every creak of the floor reminded, me how empty love can sound when no one returns it aloud. I walked into Daniel's old room, the posters still hung crooked on the wall, the faint scent of his childhood cologne still lingering. I sat on the bed and whispered into the quiet, "I'm sorry, Danny, maybe I held on too tight." And for the first time in years, I cried, real unfiltered tears that soaked my hands until they trembled. I cried for the years I spent protecting him from storms that eventually found him anyway. I cried for the woman I had raised him to be kind to, and who now saw me as an obstacle. I cried for the silence that had replaced my son's voice. The letter I never sent. A week later I wrote him a letter, not to accuse, not to demand, just to explain. "My dearest Danny, I know marriage changes things. It should. You've built a life with Clara, and I'm proud of you for that. But I want you to know that love doesn't stop just because the roles change. I might worry too much, or call too often, but it's only because I miss the boy who used to tell me everything. I don't want to interfere. I just don't want to disappear. Love always, Mom." I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, but I never mailed it. Something in me realized that words on paper couldn't mend what silence had broken, so I kept it tucked inside my Bible, where all my unanswered prayers seemed to rest. The visit. Months passed before he came again. It was late spring, the lilacs blooming by the window, their scent so strong it felt like memory itself. He arrived alone this time. When I opened the door, I saw something in his eyes, tiredness, maybe remorse. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in?" We sat at the table, the same one where my heart had cracked open months earlier. I poured tea, pretending my hands weren't shaking. "Clara's visiting her parents," he said. "I thought I'd stop by. I've been meaning to talk to you." I nodded, afraid to hope. He took a breath. "I should have said something that night. I just didn't know how. Clara's been under a lot of stress and I didn't want another fight. But the truth is, you didn't deserve that." My eyes stung, but I forced a smile. "We all say things we regret when we're hurting, even me." He reached across the table and took my hand. His grip was warm, steady. "You're my mom and I love you. I just need to figure out how to be a husband and a son at the same time." I nodded again, the tears coming before I could stop them. "You'll figure it out, Danny. You always do." He smiled faintly, the same way he used to when he'd scrape his knees and I told him it would heal, and somehow that smile was enough. When he left that evening, he hugged me longer than he had in years. I watched him drive away, the lilacs swaying gently in the breeze like hands waving goodbye. Or maybe hello. That night, I sat at the same table again. The silence was still there, but it was softer now, less cruel. I took out the old letter and read it one more time. Then I finally tore it up, not out of anger but peace, because some words don't need to be mailed once the heart has already heard them. Epilogue. Grandma's unfiltered tears. Now, months later, I sit by the window knitting a small blanket, yellow, soft, full of hope. Daniel and Clara are expecting their first child. He called to tell me the news himself. His voice trembled when he said, "Mom, we'd love for you to visit when the baby's born." And just like that, the ache inside me found air again. I hung up the phone and cried. Not the kind of tears that hurt, but the kind that heal. Because love, I've learned, is not a perfect circle. It's a thread, sometimes tangled, sometimes frayed, but always strong enough to tie generations together. And maybe one day, when that baby is old enough to sit at my table, I'll tell them this story. Not to make them choose sides, but to show them that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the sound of the heart learning to breathe again.